Well, welcome to Talking Heads. I'm Chip Franklin, joined, of course, by Endy Zemenides, again, who is the executive director of the Hellenic American Leadership Council. T-Pain, who is one of the top influencers in the world and a fashion icon in every possible way you can be. I'm Chip Franklin, and it's great to have you here. Let's get right into it and bring in our guest, who is a former assistant director of the FBI. He's also a best-selling author of a great book that I've read. It's called The FBI Way. And Frank Figliuzzi is with us here. Frank, thank you so much for being here. It's good to see you. You look well. It's crazy times.
As they say, it's better to look good than to feel good. But thank you for
and you look marvelous.
You do. Let's just dive right into this, okay? Obviously, the what's going on in Ukraine, and for those of us that grew up in the 80s, 70s, and 80s, and used to worry about nuclear war with Russia, we were all, again, joyed by what happened in 1989 and felt that maybe, a new world order might be established. Unfortunately, it hasn't. We're on a level of DEFCON 1 to 5. Where is the FBI right now? And how do you feel? How worried are you?
So look, we got they're at a 4. They're at a 4 to 4+. On any given day, they're at a 3+. But let's go quickly around the globe and talk about the domestic and global threats that the FBI all has to deal with. You mentioned Ukraine and Russia. Don't forget, the Russian intelligence presence inside the United States has essentially not changed since the so-called end of the Cold War. So there are still spies here. They're busy recruiting those Russians. You've heard news reports of that. They're actually messaging devices in and around diplomatic establishments, telling Russians, here's how you can contact us, because essentially the Russians are not letting them out of the embassies and consulates because they're scared of recruitment. They've PNG, declared persona non grata, 12 Russian spies out of the United Nations. This is going around the world. Then we've got the threat of a growing Al-Qaeda/ISIS since we pulled out of Afghanistan. Now we have Russians threatening all kinds of crap, even here domestically. Now let's go to the domestic threat, which now exceeds the threat of international terrorism and the January 6th investigation, which I'm still told, Chip, is all hands on deck in virtually every single field office in the FBI. It's no longer just about that 800 some odd people indicted going to trial for violence in and around the building, but now it's quite clear with a grand jury sitting in Washington, D.C. on January 6th and subpoenaing some really interesting people like Ali Alexander, that this is getting extremely serious. So it is all hands on deck, probably exceeding the level post 9/11 right now in the FBI.
So, Frank, since you talk about 9/11, and one of the problems in the 9/11 report, we saw that our intelligence community was not necessarily communicating with the FBI, right? So how is the information sharing going on? Because there is quite a bit of overlap with domestic threats and these international threats. And we know from having watched the Russians in the Balkans, in Europe, that they know how to take advantage of chaos. And that's what we have right now. Are the CIA and FBI finally talking? Is there a solid flow of information here, or are we going to be caught flat-footed?
I love this question because, history tends to repeat itself. So I was one of the few people early while I was in the FBI right after 9/11. I'll never forget a meeting of all office heads, all the special agents in charge of field offices, and a high-ranking guy in charge of terrorism comes into the room and says, and I know he's going to take the position that we did not fail in 9/11, that this had to happen. We didn't know exactly what was happening. And he said, who in this room thinks this was a failure? And only two of us raised our hands. And I was one of them. Because of course it's a failure. If your mission is to stop terrorism and we had a major act of terrorism, yeah, I'd call that a failure. And I called January 6th a failure for similar reasons. Dots were not connected. The dots were clearly there and not connected. So now the reason I love the question you're asking is you used the phrase overlap, the foreign threat with the domestic threat. who's connecting the dots now? And people might look at the domestic threat and go, well, CIA doesn't have to help the FBI on a domestic threat. What dots are there overseas to connect? And I'm here to tell you that Russia and China, but particularly now Russia, are absolutely now part of the domestic threat. By that, I mean the propaganda, the social media, the hacking that's going on. But we didn't even touch on the cyber threat, my friends, which really we've not seen manifest itself yet in the Russia threat, but it is coming. They've already stated they're thinking of.
So do you think in the January 6th investigation we're going to find out about any Russian involvement?
I think we're going to find foreign money. I think we're going to find foreign money involved. I don't know particularly if that's Russia.
How would it have been involved?
Well, I've got sources telling me that a significant portion of the FBI's investigation of January 6th involves the possibility of foreign funding of certain domestic groups, travel, social media aspects of building the threat, having people feel energized that they lost, the election was stolen from them, that we're going to see the likely possibility of foreign funding of energizing that crowd and even funding travel and money and material for January 6th.
T, I know you got a question real quick.
Yeah, Brother Frank.
Let me follow up real quick on that. Do you believe that story that it's possible the National Guard actually were slow to respond because they were afraid that Trump might use them to try to take the Capitol? Have you heard that story?
Yep, I've read it. I've read the reporting. At this point, Chip, nothing would surprise me. We already know that about 13% of all of those 800 arrested have military or law enforcement connections, active or former. And so the idea that the National Guard would somehow be immune or some kind of island unto itself and not be radicalized, I think would be foolish.
Go ahead, T.
Well, Brother Frank, Chip kind of stepped on where T-Pain's question was going, but got another one for you. And first of all, T-Pain's a little bit starstruck because whenever he's over at the skid mark and you're on TV, he has to buy a round of drinks so everybody will be quiet so we can listen. But
I've got to get over to the skid mark.
Yeah, me too, right? Yeah.
But as a lawman with the FBI, for all those years you applied the law with impartiality, and as an analyst on TV, I'm sure you carefully measure your responses. But you're like a really good guitar amp right now. You're cranked up to right about 8 or 9 when it's in the sweet spot. So T-Pain wants to hear from you how you feel as a fellow that used to chase bad guys for a living, and as American, as a man, how do you feel about a sitting president and members of Congress launching an open, violent insurrection against our own country?
I never thought I'd see it, and I like the way you led into this question because repeatedly people come up to me and assume certain things about me politically that aren't necessarily accurate. They assume that because I'm on MSNBC, I'm coming from some far left ideology. And what I tell people is this: I want you to know something. I never even followed politics closely for 25 years in the FBI because that's not what we were about. What I'm trained to do is identify threats, national security threats, and then take steps to mitigate them. I don't come down on any political side of the aisle. What I come down on is I'm against national security threats, and I'll do everything in my power to negate them, to defeat them. And right now, without a doubt, I see the people behind January 6th, Trump and his followers, Republicans who refuse to move away from Trump and conspiracy theories and the big lie. I see them as, this is far greater than some political party. I see them as a national security threat to our democracy. Just like I'm a believer in defeating Putin overseas because he is threatening not just Ukraine, but democracy writ large. And if we fail to see that, we're failing to see the big picture. I feel the same way, T-Pain, domestically. If we fail to see this for what it is, a national security threat, and vote those people out of office and take action for accountability, then shame on us because we're slowly and increasingly rapidly losing our democracy.
So Frank,
if this was church, it'd be time to pass the plate right now.
But Frank, how do we rebuild? You know, your institution, you served in law enforcement, which is in furtherance of the rule of law. The rule of law is being undermined across the board, and both sides, by the way. FBI was politicized in 2016, then 2017, then 2018. It's politicized today. No matter which side of the aisle, we don't like the court's decision. And it's not only Supreme Courts, it's local courts. We politicize the courts. Today, people are just defying, and it makes sense that Steven Seagal is pro-Putin because everybody thinks they're above the law, like in the movie. But not only at this FBI level on January 6th, today we had a report in Chicago that people were just walking up and down the public transportation, spitting on people, and people are not taking public transportation now as a result. How do we restore this faith that the rule of law is being carried out correctly? Because it's not, I don't think it's going to be simply as getting more prosecutions. How do we get citizens to say, I have to obey the law?
It takes years to remake and restore what you have rightly said has been eroded in our institutions. You've only alluded to some of the institutions. Let's talk about the Centers for Disease Control. You talk about people spitting in the Chicago mass transit. Doctors at the Centers for Disease Control, who simply come to work every day trying to heal people, they need security details. Their families are being threatened. DOJ, no, as you said, from both sides of the aisle, no one thinks, Merrick Garland's an enemy, or Merrick Garland isn't doing anything, or he's doing too much. Supreme Court now, we don't believe in their decisions. We've had a federal judge appointed by Trump in Florida say we don't. The federal government, I don't care where you come down on masks, but what this federal judge has said, who is deemed unqualified by the Bar Association,
right.
What she has said is way bigger than mask issues. It's the federal government doesn't have the authority to intervene in a deadly pandemic, is what she's saying. We are upside down right now. And it's going to take a slow, deliberate period of accountability and consequences, right? That's the first thing. So people need to think again if they're about to do something like this again. The 800 people that are going to be sentenced in the January 6th violence, that sends a message. Yeah, I really don't think I want to do some prison time next time. It's got to happen at the higher levels as well. That's why I support. I'm not one of these people who says let bygones be bygones. Let's pat Trump on the head. This will never happen again. Oh, it will happen again, and particularly it will happen again if there's no accountability and consequences. To include people like Mark Meadows. Let's go to Ted Cruz. Let's go to Josh Hawley. There has to be accountability. That's what I hope is happening.
To that point, what are your thoughts on Fox News and Tucker Carlson and their promoting Putin's position? And obviously there's a political aspect here that they're trying to gain, but what is being lost and what is being misunderstood by, the tens of millions of people that watch him?
So this has gone way beyond free speech. I took an oath of office when I became an FBI agent to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. That means I was willing to risk my life for somebody like Tucker Carlson's right to free speech. We are way beyond free speech at this point. We are aiding and abetting an adversary when we see what Tucker Carlson is doing.
Wait, time out. You mean legally you're saying that Tucker Carlson is violating the law?
So I think I've said publicly that I think Vladimir Putin is a war criminal and this comes from my FBI background, I believe he's committing terrorism. I believe what he's doing is the definition on our books in Title 18 of terrorism. Those who aid and abet him are aiding and abetting terrorism. When you turn on the evening news in Moscow every night and you see nothing but clips of Tucker Carlson or Tulsi Gabbard or Laura Ingraham, you've got to stop and say, wait a minute, this isn't free speech anymore. This is now being our own people deliberately being used by an enemy against us.
Wow. Brother Frank, last night we heard that old Alex Jones went over to the Department of Justice and was crying like a baby for a plea deal. What's your take on that?
Alex Jones needs to go away for the remainder of his miserable life. I grew up in Connecticut, right next to Newtown, Sandy Hook. They were in our athletic league. We played them in sports. I've been there many times. I know people who lost grandchildren and children in Sandy Hook Elementary School. For him to come out in such a vile way and imply that those were actors, that it didn't happen, is an offense against morality and humanity. And for him to hide behind bankruptcy and delay and obfuscate, you want to talk about un-American? The definition of that is Alex
It's
Jones.
inhuman. It's beyond un-American. It's inhuman.
Well,
Yeah.
And the bankruptcy, listen, the bankruptcy, I'm a little upset at everybody just focusing on the bankruptcy. That was part of a civil suit. That was the parents finally sticking up for themselves.
Right.
But they got death threats. What's going on here? Has the FBI looked into those death threats? Is, just like you said, Tucker Carlson aiding and abetting an enemy. Didn't Alex Jones, isn't he an accomplice to some threats?
I would take it a step higher than accomplice. I believe he is the cause of those death threats. His vile stuff that he spews every day generates the death threats. He calls for it. And so we talked about rule of law. I am a big fan of using the system against these people. So, for example, go way back to the days when it was discovered that tobacco was addictive and that the industry knew it and hid that research. Now, fast forward to the parents of Sandy Hook suing firearms makers and winning against that. We are a capitalist society. That people listen to monetary fines. That's how you make an impact. Take away Alex Jones's money. Sue Fox News when they speak vile untruths deliberately, right? And pretend that they're not journalists. Oh, we're entertainment.
They gave time to Putin's false flag comment about Ukrainians dead on the side of the road. Fox came out and Tucker came out and said, Putin says, how do we know they're not fake actors pretending to be dead? I mean, when you get that, I get what you're saying, Frank. I don't see that being prosecuted. And I wonder if we go down that road, what happens when the political tables are turned?
I like civil court versus criminal on most of this, Chip. I think that's where the truth comes out. But most importantly, you hurt somebody where it counts the most, and that's the pocketbook. When a voting machine company sues for defamation, for example, that hurts. That changes conduct. You saw Fox News change conduct when they realized we're getting our ass sued by these voting machine companies. Tone it down, folks. It does seem to get to them when you affect the bottom line. Same for sponsorship. I've heard people say, well, Tucker's down to like three advertisers, and they carry it from the profit comes from subscription services. Well, okay, good. Make it harder. Make it harder. Nobody should be sponsoring untruths and conspiracy theories and lies.
Hey, Frank, you talked about Carlson is, basically an agent of Putin. And over the last several years, we've had more there. For our listener, or for our audience, there's a piece of legislation, Foreign Agent Registration Act, that anybody who's getting paid or directed to work on behalf of a foreign government has to register and declare and report all their activities. And we've had more prosecutions under FARA and more investigations under FARA in the last, I believe, 5 years than we've ever had. Is this something that's going to pick up steam? And should we even be allowing this? Should we be allowing Americans to say, hey, I'm going to get paid by Putin or Erdogan or Azerbaijan, to work on behalf of their interests?
So and I think Chip alluded to this earlier about the flip side happening. So we've got to proceed with great caution, because understand, and I tell people this all the time, I know you want people locked up, I know, but understand that the tables could be turned and the people that you don't want coming after you could be empowered by this. So let's be careful. The Foreign Agents Registration Act, I love it, but it requires documented evidence that you understand you're working for a foreign power, a foreign entity, or worse, the heavy hit on the FARA related statutes involves working for the foreign government, not just an entity of a foreign country. So I don't know. Here's the rub. If we want the FBI investigating Tucker's relationships with Russia, now we get into this weird and valid concern about, do we want our government investigating media organizations?
We don't.
No. I'm looking at something else. I'm saying, should we even have, you can get paid to do Putin's bidding. You can get paid to do Huawei's bidding. Right now, we're going abroad, asking allies, asking people who can't afford 5G, can't afford top-end 5G, don't buy China's 5G. But then we're letting Americans get paid to lobby for Huawei in Washington. Should that just go away and say, nope, nobody can do it, ally or foe, you just can't do it?
Yeah, there comes a point when a foreign nation poses such a threat and represents such an adversarial threat that we should be shutting down. And look, the sanctions, I'll give you an example of what you just said. The sanctions being levied against Russia right now do involve penalties for those who try to do business with Russia. So we're almost at that point. And I'll go a step further. If we declared Russia a state sponsor of terrorism, which I advocate for, we would freeze their assets here, but also we would penalize financially other people and nations who continue to do business with Russia. That is what essentially you're talking about.
How's this going to end, Frank?
The Russia mess? Yeah. Okay. So I know people are wrestling with this and have great angst over the loss of life, which is horrific. And I understand, I have good friends who I respect who are saying, Frank, it's time for Ukraine to concede some territory and end the loss of life. This is a moral thing for them, and I totally respect that. But as someone who worked the Russia threat for 25 years in the intelligence community, I'm here to tell you that you can cede all of the provinces you want to Putin, and he will see it as a victory and keep going. You are applying logic to a
keep
lunatic.
Going east in Ukraine or into Poland and Germany.
And look at Sweden and Finland for the first time seriously considering NATO membership. They're not kidding. They see the threat for what it is. So here's how this ends. It ends with the demise of Putin. Either his own people do him in, which, by the way, it's a pretty viable possibility.
But they're not so great at people either, though, right?
The real problem, Frank, is that it looks like he's getting more popular.
Yeah.
He controls all the information. So
exactly. When you control the media, right? When you can throw prison in people for telling the truth, you absolutely can increase your popularity pretty easily. So the world has to come together and actually help Putin go away in many forms, whether that's whatever that takes. But this notion that give him some face, I keep hearing some off-ramp, some face-saving measure. No. The off-ramp for him is a fatal crash somewhere.
So how do you keep somebody from that, from going to the next step? I mean, a tactical nuclear weapon, or, he could even give nuclear material to terrorist groups. Yeah. And how do we stop that from happening and accomplish what you just said?
I hope to God that our CIA and the allied services are taking care of business on the ground in Russia and other places. I'll leave it at that. I had a podcast guest last week, 2 weeks ago, General Barry McCaffrey, who you probably see on MSNBC all the time. The guy's working overtime right now. He said some pretty sobering things about tactical nukes, biochemical warfare, and it's this, generally. The Pentagon is ready for that. The Pentagon has plans, if indeed a tactical nuke is used or serious biochemical weapons are introduced into Ukraine. And I will tell you, it is swift and severe, and Putin will regret it.
David Sanger told me that we could shut down the internet for Russia indefinitely. We could take Putin's money offshore and make it disappear. I mean, he thinks we're much stronger. Even though they're already here and in our infrastructure, he thinks our ability to cause havoc and to shut them down entirely is our next step, and would even be the step after, if he did use some kind of bioweapon or tactical nuke in Ukraine, we would just shut them down instead of responding in kind. It's all crazy stuff. Let me ask you another question real quick, though. Our good friend Malcolm Nance, is in Ukraine right now. I love Malcolm. He's just, he's had a tough couple of years. He lost his wife. Good people, right? Great writer. He's writing a book about coming out. They want to kill us all, and I've read it. It's horrifying. And what he says, this white supremacy movement, this homegrown domestic violence, this homegrown terror. How do we abate that, or is that just got to go and burn itself out?
Well, there's always going to be an element of racism in our society and hatred of the other. It's taken many forms. We had the KKK for decades that had large membership at some point. The question is to what degree we allow it to surface and give it license. It's been given license by the former president. It's okay to do this now. And we've got to make it not okay. So you mentioned what challenges is the FBI up against? This is one of them. The FBI director has said in testimony on the Hill, the greatest threat within domestic terrorism is hate-based, violent, racial threats. So it's all hands on deck to bring down those groups, whatever groups they are. They failed in the militia case in Michigan, where they failed in part on 2 subjects there, but they're winning in other places. This is a whole of society solution. It's not just law enforcement, it's education, teachers, clergy, corporations, telling CEOs as leaders, telling their company.
Aren't they getting away with it in Michigan? Isn't that the problem? We catch the bad guys, whether it's the guys who wanted to kidnap Governor Whitmer. We caught Michael Flynn red-handed. He literally got off, he had this immunity deal. He gets pardoned. This was a guy who was the national security advisor of the United States. Mm-hmm. And he was going to get paid to kidnap a legal citizen from Pennsylvania.
Right.
And extradite him to Turkey.
All
right. And now we have people walking around completely unaccountable. So how do we fix this when you're saying, it's a whole of society, but on the law enforcement front, we're letting people walk?
Let's not forget, Michael Flynn was convicted. He got off because Trump let him off. So the key root cause there is a president who doesn't believe in the rule of law and will abuse the pardon power and the commutation power. So we're coming right back full circle to each of us taking a step to vote. The midterm elections are coming. If you want people who are going to abuse pardons and commutations, thumb their nose at DOJ, not show up for subpoenas, if you want that, then all you need to do is vote status quo in many of your territories, your red states. If you want change, if you're sick and tired of this, it's time to vote in a different direction. That's the only power we have left here.
T-Pain, you got a last question here?
I just got to say, we got to get this guy in front of a crowd.
From Hamilton. Hey, last thing, looking at the next 2 years and the possibility of President Trump having both houses of Congress again, that frightens me almost as much as what's happening in Russia right now. Just because I believe that, as evidenced by this Piers Morgan interview, this is a guy that's lost it. Brian Karem, who's a friend, said he's seen it up close at these briefings, and the lawn, his inability to keep a thought, and the people that would take advantage of him. But then you look at, there must be such fear of his base. In this interview, he called McConnell again an idiot, and he called Pence a weak fool. Yet they won't stand up to him. Mm-hmm. None of them will. What frightens you more, that Trump presidency with both houses of Congress, or Russia?
We can deal with Russia. We can deal with them. We seem unable to view ourselves as a threat domestically, and that worries me more, Chip. I'm going to be completely honest with you. And what worries me even more than Trump coming back is somebody with more intellect than Trump, but just like him, coming back. That scares me, because Trump is seen even by those who follow him as a kind of an idiot who they like. What happens if it's not an idiot? What happens if it's a Harvard law degree or a Yale law degree? You know the guys I'm talking about. That scares me more.
Well, Brother Frank, in other countries, they've got a sort of an elegant way of dealing with coups where the winners execute the losers. Do you think we can do something outside of that, but to show the country and the world that we are that shining city on a hill? Do you believe if you were going to take the equity in your home and bet on it, what kind of odds would you give that Trump and his minions will actually see some real legal accountability?
Wow. It's a good thing I'm not a betting man, because I have to tell you, I'm encouraged that there's a grand jury sitting. I'm encouraged by statements from Merrick Garland that he's unafraid of going to the highest levels, but I don't know if the will is there. I don't know. I don't know. I would walk away from that bet, T-Pain. I couldn't make the bet.
Rolling Stone said it. You don't always get what you want, but sometimes you get what you need. And it's medicine that will have to take maybe a while to fix. There's a huge lesson here to learn. And, and it's great. Not to blow smoke up your skirt there, Frank, but it's good to have people like you on our side and others. Again, with Malcolm, I keep my fingers crossed that he's okay over there. There's a lot of great Americans. This is still a great country. Due process is what separates us from everybody else. And that pisses us off, right? Due process is hard. Doesn't always work out the way we want, right. But we have to protect that, because we let that go. Yep. And the whole thing goes.
We've got nothing. That's right.
All right. While we were doing this, I just ordered 2 copies of the FBI Way, and I sent them to T-Pain and Endy. So I make sure they read it. Okay.
Thank you, sir. Paperback is out now.
Yeah. Oh, it's cheaper. That's why I waited. So anyway, hey, you be well, Frank. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Stay safe, everybody.
Take care, Brother Frank.
Again, former assistant director of the FBI, Frank Figliuzzi, great guy. It is a great book. We really have to get. So let's talk about Tucker Carlson's testicles, if you can handle that for a minute. Did you see any of this video? This is freaking insane. How does this guy? How does he? I don't understand the people that watch him. I don't. Nothing.
Look, I think
for everybody that doesn't know, let me just set up real quick. Yeah. So Tucker Carlson has a special ad. He's talking about the end of men. He's saying that men are this whole thing too about white men are being disenfranchised just because finally, we're beginning to see, oh, you know what? There's more people here in this country than there are white men, and things are changing. It doesn't mean it's bad for white men. It's just things are changing. And all these conservative Republicans, decry this as an act against, the people that made this country, which is all bullshit. But I look at this and I think to myself, Tucker Carlson is a doughy-eyed prep boy who is not indicative of any of these people that worship him. Can you explain that?
I think listen, Chip, people are angry, and President Clinton, if you remember, President Clinton said this thing: if people are given the choice between hope and fear, they're always going to pick hope. No, that's wrong. They're going to pick fear. And unfortunately, fear picks them, whatever it is. It's it's more powerful. It's like, like those who read comics and remember Parallax and Green Lantern, who would literally take your soul with fear. Yeah. And this is why, by the way, we're gonna regret not getting through parts of Build Back Better. The fundamental part of our democracy, the reason, since we're talking about Russia, the rest of the world always looked during the Cold War at America, at capitalist democracy as the example, because the other side didn't work. Now the other side is pointing to us and saying they're not working either, and we're not trying to fix it. We're not trying to fix it.
But you know what? Everything is working. This is still a great country. There's jobs. The economy is growing. We have, granted.
I disagree. I don't think everything is working. I think when you go back and you look at staples of life, we have for the first time a generation of parents who think that their kids, the first generation of parents ever, that think their kids are going to be less well off. When we have most,
that's because of the kids.
It's no, because there are verifiable numbers that social mobility is higher. We're creating 2 Americas, and we're blind to it. There was even great articles about how travel soccer or even sports, which used to be a unifying thing, has become a way to create two Americas. Education, there's study after study that kids who go to better universities not only have better jobs, but they marry richer and all the rest. And we're ignoring that. We're ignoring the fact that we have to rebuild a middle-class America. And we're not doing enough on that front. And people are lashing out against the people in power.
T, what do you think?
Well, down here in Gizzard Ridge, there's all types of folks, and most of them are all good people. But the funny thing that T has noticed over the last 5 or 6, 7 years is that those same good people that would give you the shirt off their back, when you talk to them about politics, it's like they put another hat on, and all of a sudden they become different people. They transform right in front of your eyes. And well, the Bible says that knowledge putteth away fear.
Yeah.
What is knowledge? Well, the knowledge is the lack of ignorance. And what we've done is we've polarized ourselves so much that we've even polarized basic truth. We don't believe anything anymore with a certainty, along with it, the law, as Frank talked about. And because we don't have this certainty, we're full of doubt. And what does doubt do? It abhors a vacuum, as they say. And we will fill it up with all types of phobias and things like that. Right now, everybody thinks they're a victim. A victim of what? They're not a victim of anything except their own conscience.
I agree with that. I agree. You know, it's funny you talk about the Bible. I always, when people start talking about the Bible, I just go to the New Testament. You know, I'm an atheist, but I love the New Testament.
Well, a lot of these folks down here, they read the Bible just looking for loopholes.
Yeah.
Same way the constitutional conservatives use the Constitution. They're just looking for loopholes.
Yeah. Well, I love the whole, the idea of a strict constructionist that's pro-life. I'm like, what? I mean, what part? I mean, there was abortion when they were drafting the Constitution. I mean, they could have put something in there. They knew that women were terminating pregnancies. It's not something that's unique to our times now. I mean, I think that, if there was one thing that really worries me right now, it's the rabbit hole that abortion rights, the eradication of abortion rights, because it's easy to go into a Margaret Atwood novel quickly, that you can, okay, well then we can have periodic checks of women that are leaving the state to make sure they're not pregnant. I mean, I'm trying to put together with really American, a fund to help women get out of Texas to be able to go get abortions, right? Right now they can't. If you can hear a heartbeat, boom, that's it. And even then, you can hear a heartbeat in like the first 2 weeks, right? So I mean, this idea that these people can go in a doctor's office and interfere with that communication between a woman and her, gynecological services. What's next? Why not go one step further? I mean, Georgia wanted to go chase them across state lines. If they left,
this is all the same thing with Tucker's obsession with manliness.
Right, exactly.
It's all about, it's not about so much the men as it is the control of the women.
Yep.
And they've been doing this for centuries, but they're really getting good at it again. And you thought we were past that point, but we've actually circled right back to 1978 or 68. It's like we're waiting to see if Roe v. Wade ever existed.
And you know what? A big part of Roe v. Wade, because Roe v. Wade was, and it's not being discussed enough. We're only talking about the right to abortion, but Roe v. Wade was based on another decision that ensured a right to privacy. So if you get rid of Roe v. Wade, now you're looking at a right to privacy, and that affects the 21st century society in a way that I don't think people can imagine. A second part, since we're talking about threats faced from abroad, is that, and strict constructionists, by the way, let's be honest, Chip, they're not saying outlaw abortion. They're saying all the decisions made by the states, right? Some of them may want to outlaw it.
Well, they're taking the 10th Amendment.
Yeah, they're taking 50 different legal systems. Are we the United States of America anymore? And it's not only, and this is another thing, I hope one day we can get Kurt Anderson, who wrote a tremendous book called Evil Geniuses, that they may be coming with abortion, but really what they want to do is get rid of the regulatory state. They want to go to before the New Deal. They want to just get rid of the whole New Deal and go to Herbert Hoover's.
Essentially, they want to repeal.
If we got that, can we compete with China?
They want to repeal everything after the Second Amendment, pretty much.
Yeah. You're right. And in fact,
essentially everything that we did good in the 20th century, they want to get rid of.
And I don't think Madison wrote the Bill of Rights intending to be vague. I think that they were intended to be over time to be read and interpreted as times changed. I mean, everything about it, about the ability to change the Constitution indicates that they knew that this was not a perfect document, And
Thomas Jefferson said every generation should
5 years. Every 5 years, he said that we should tear it up and start over, But then again, he also raped a slave and had children with her. So there's that, right? These guys were complex people in a very difficult time, not dissimilar in some ways to what maybe we're facing now. And
do you reckon any of these founding fathers at any time in their lives tanned their testicles?
On that note, let's end this baby. All right. Hey, next week we have Ro Khanna. Congressman Ro Khanna is going to be on with us. And he's a great guy, and he's very interested in January 6th. And well, hopefully we'll get a little bit more from him on that as well. Again, Endy Zemenides, again, is Executive Director of Hellenic American Leadership Council, our #1 influencer and funny guy, and well, T-Pain. Thank you so much, T-Pain. I'm looking forward
to get you red, white, and blue sunglasses for next time.
Yes, hey, well, welcome to our full-time team now. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure, brothers.
All right, guys, you all be well. Till next time, it's the Talking Heads.